Hi, I'm Ian Bly of Optimized Results, like a personal trainer for your mind. And we're going to talk about internal prejudice and the hierarchies we create. There's a lot of conflict coming to the surface recently for a lot of people, and I thought that a little exploration might help. What goes on inside of us affects what goes on around us. If there are conflicts going on inside of us, those conflicts are going to start happening around us as well. I'll start with communications. One of the first places we'll see this. I'm really big on low hanging fruit. Our internal and external communication isn't always as conscious as we'd like it to be. And just like with a pebble hitting the water, the ripples move outward in an unbreakable relationship between the two. Matter of fact, I have a slide for this. So an event is followed by its repercussions. And this is why I love the image of the pebble hitting the water and the ripples emanating outward. The way we talk to ourselves internally invariably affects the way we talk to others externally. And those ripples keep going as the way we talk to others then affects them, and they in turn affect others in their surroundings, and so on and so on. So let's start with that first pebble. Before we even get into the super duper nuances, like I said, I love low hanging fruit. So, for example, internally, we often berate ourselves for making mistakes or forgetting things. And this becomes a kind of a normal way for us to be thinking or a way for us to be reacting. So we don't think twice about doing it when we do it with other people, when they make mistakes or they forget things. Reverse engineering, if we add a little consciousness to the mix, we can make an enormous difference in our communications by how we talk to ourselves. Let's look at motivation. It's much more common for us to kick ourselves in the butt than to ask ourselves to do something nicely. We don't have evidence that being a drill sergeant is any more effective or any more useful, so why do we do it? Well, generally, the answer is unconscious habit, which means it's not a life sentence. We can change it. Even the disconnected word should, coming from some invisible rule book, tends to create more resistance than motivation. So let's dig down to one of the roots of this pushy thing we do to ourselves. Almost every one of us is taught from childhood that our primary way of taking in and processing the world around us is either wrong or somehow inferior to somebody else's way. And although we're born with our own primary processing center in its own way quite perfect, external indoctrination sets up a hierarchy, and it usually puts your natural way down a notch or two. And this is what I'm calling internal prejudice. A very common example of this would be the hierarchy that says cool, calm, collected thinking is better than emotional feelings. Someone who processes in a more feeling-centric way can be convinced that their pain is a result of their chaotic feelings and that they should control these feelings with detached thinking. Well, two problems are going to come up from this. One is it's a self-denigrating program and getting put into place, and it's never going to work out that well. And more importantly, it doesn't work, either in rebellion or from a stronger sense of self. Some feeling-centric processing types will assert feelings over thinking in a different hierarchy. Their rationale, of course, is going to be more authenticity, more presence, a sense of unique identity, which is, I guess, the familiar flaky artist versus the robot argument. And even now, we haven't mentioned the third group, the intuitive, gut-driven, I just know it people. So we've got three variables, heart, brain, and gut, all rearranging in 9 potential hierarchies. There's thinking over feelings and then intuition, intuition over feelings and then thinking, and so on and so on and so on. These hierarchies that we put in place are nothing more than belief systems about our own ways of processing, and they're not rooted in fact. The same things can be said around limitations and resources, depending on the circumstances and how well we're able to navigate our own inner landscape. It could go either way. How we regard aspects of ourselves in hierarchy, judging, rating, and so on, it's also another limiting belief system. It fragments us rather than integrating us. And it sets up needless internal conflict where cooperation would serve us much better. Now, we all have at least two of these processing centers naturally, usually all three, and they each take in different information. The free flow of information without any kind of judgment from one part of us to the other part of us, it offers you a fuller, richer experience. Your decisions can be better, more informed, and you can take action more easily without the internal filibustering. No power struggles, no arguing with yourself. The difference between these extremes of limitations or resources depends on your beliefs. You're ultimately in charge of this, whether you believe cool, detached thinking is superior or the opposite. You'll set up internal conflict and you'll filter the information coming in. If you acknowledge each of your processing centers as taking in its own forms of information, all equally valid, you eliminate the internal conflict and you take in much more information. You fully use your own resources. Now, another way to look at these different processing centers taking in and processing different information would be comparing them to light or sound waves, basically energy frequencies. So another screen. Here you go. There are frequencies that are below and above our ability to observe them. But that doesn't mean that they aren't there or they aren't valid and they aren't important. Emotional information, including empathy, feelings, and so on, is processed differently than the logical, linear data our brains are equipped to process. It's also somewhat devoid of the threat model analysis that our brain first processing favors. Likewise, our gut intuition is neither logical nor a feeling. It's kind of a body sensory experience. This doesn't devalue the information. We just need to add all three kinds of information together to get a complete picture. No one of these three is more important than the other two. Our brains are composed of many areas that communicate with one another like musicians in an orchestra. There's an enormous amount of neural ganglia surrounding the heart, and this reaches up into our midbrain and our limbic system. So the concept of heartbreak is not as abstract as you might think. The circumstances of an extreme emotional impact will involve this network, and the limbic system will alter the heartbeat, sometimes even creating a kind of spasm in musculature, creating a cardiac event. Likewise, we have plenty of brain function happening in our guts as well. The enteric nervous system uses more than 30 neurotransmitters, just like the brain. And 95% of the serotonin in the body is in the gut, not the brain. So who's to say a gut feeling about something isn't extremely accurate and useful? Even without a hierarchy, each of us still has a primary processing center. When you throw a ball into a room, it hits one surface first before bouncing into the others. This isn't superiority, it's merely sequence. And our primary processing center is just the first surface encountering life, the first wall that the ball hits. If we're taught that this isn't valid, we spend our lives invalidating ourselves. If we raise it above the others, we filter and we miss other information. By shifting our beliefs about the false hierarchies and prejudices we create with our very abilities to take in and process, we can facilitate a smooth integration of our best aspects. We can eliminate the internal conflicts that block us when we want to take action. And because these beliefs are about false hierarchies, they're really not so difficult to shift. It does take a little extra consciousness.